Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Pagan's Witchy Corner. My name is Pagan, and I'm joined by some very wonderful and familiar friends that you all have gotten very used to having on the show, and we love having them every single time they're here. That is Eric and Laova of the Spirit World Center. Welcome back, both of you.
Hello. Thank you for having us. Really excited for today's topic.
I love having you guys here, and we always have some of the best conversations when you guys are here. And today's topic is going to be one of those ones where um, I'm going to put out a minor trigger warning. It's not a major one, it's just a minor one, but we will be talking about death work. So if that's something that you're not really comfortable with, or it makes you uncomfortable and you don't feel like this would be an episode for you, this is your soft trigger warning, letting you know that's what we will be discussing today. We'll also be talking about healing as well in death work. So that way you are prepared going forward and you're not just like, oh, wow, that was really hard on me. That's okay. We understand that the world's climate is a little hard right now. So, going forward in the episode, that way you all are aware. But I'm so excited to talk about this because this is, obviously a big part of what I do in my practice and what you all do in your practice. And I'm excited to kind of discuss it and go deeper into it and give people an understanding of what death work and psychopomp work and the healing modalities that go with it kind of are.
It's so good to be on the show today, and absolutely, this is a an incredibly important topic that arises. I mean, we're all going to die one day, and that's
Mhm.
just a fact of life, and it's a part of life that, especially in our Western culture, we don't like to face. It's hidden, and it's something that people feel very uncomfortable with, and I find though that when you really, let's say, get involved in psychopomp work, it takes some of the fear away from death. In fact, it takes a lot of the fear away from death because you realize, okay, it's a reality, it's an inevitability. And yet at the same time, if you have some understanding of how it works and also how to help others who have passed on, it becomes a manageable reality where you can not just sit back and worry about things, but actually help those who have passed on. And something that Lalva will, I'm sure, we'll get into it later in the episode, is also how to prepare for your own death
Mhm.
in a way where your spirit is ready to go and to also let go of this life when it happens. So it's a very absolutely it's a very important topic.
It's such a huge topic too, because a lot of times when we, look at the world of paganism and the world of shamanic work and all of that, a lot of times it's less in the shamanic side, but we tend to talk about spirits ethereally, and but at the same time we don't talk about kind of how they got there and the death work that's associated with that. Now, there's some really great influencers, and I say influencer, but I mean more authors and voices in the witchcraft community that do speak about this. Mortellus is one of them, but there's many others as well. But death is one of those things that even a lot of times in paganism, we don't really approach well. And can sometimes, when we do pass, leave some hesitations behind and make it difficult for that spirit to eventually pass on, which we do see many times as death workers and psychopomp workers. But at the same time, when it comes to death, we too all, especially in Western culture, like you were saying, do fear it. We fear the unknown, we fear the finality of it. And like you were saying as well, being somebody who works with psychopomps and does the death work and all that, you do have a broader appreciation of death and how it works. And yeah, your focus does shift from that fear mindset to more of an understanding mindset. And I would say more my own personal one isn't so much the fear of death itself, but more of the sadness of leaving those behind has gone from fear to I wouldn't want to leave, my friends and family in a state of grief, even though it's inevitable. But at the same time, it's one of those things where it's not so much a fear, it's just more of a concern. And I would say probably personally, 5, 10, 15 years ago, yeah, I had a fear of death just like everyone else does out there at one point in time in your life. And having that understanding of how it works and what happens, especially to spirits a lot of times on the other side, does help ease it. And you understand that there are ways that you can cope with it. And I know, like you were saying with lava, we will definitely get into the pre-death kind of things. And if you're somebody who does do death work, you might know the people who do help those who are passing on or are in the process of dying. Sometimes the people who help them in a spiritual aspect are known as death doulas and help the family cope and help the person who is also dying prepare for death. And it's a very interesting thing because a lot of people are like, oh, I know a doula for birth. Yeah, there's doulas for death as well. You get both aspects of it. So it's a very large topic that I think we're going to have a lot to discuss. And we'll see how far deep we get into it. This may be a continuation topic that we have to get into later as well.
I wouldn't doubt it. It is a huge, huge subject. And I can definitely agree with what you're saying there, that when you work with death, when you work on the psychopomp path, it's you really do come to terms with your own death, but at the
Mhm.
same time, the part that is still painful is that thought of, okay, what will happen to my family? What will happen to those I leave behind, right?
Yeah.
And so that is definitely something there. But I find that when you work with death a lot, it you realize that it really creates that realization deep within you in your heart that you are a spirit, you're not a human, and that you get this sense of, okay, I'm a spirit inhabiting this vessel for a time, and then there's that time when the body is worn out, the vessel is worn out, and so then it's time to move on. And that realization can be very liberating. It can be even liberating in terms of personal psychology and working with things like the constraints of the ego, because it really pushes home that realization that I'm not the ego, right? That the body and the ego and all this stuff happening in my mind, these are all things happening in this vessel, but ultimately I am the spirit. So that's another positive point that arises from this kind of psychopomp work or death work, is that it really reminds you, hey, you're a spirit, and that and it's actually very liberating in that way. And that, of course, is something that's very built into the whole psychopomp process. To be a psychopomp comes from it's a Greek word, and it essentially means guide to the souls of the dead.
Mhm.
And so, of course, there's many deities and other spirits who are psychopompic spirits who will help those who pass over. But at the same time, you yourself can be a psychopomp. You can be a death worker in that you as this embodied spirit can reach out and can help those who have passed to pass over. And of course, this doesn't just apply to humans. It also applies to farm animals and well, any animals in the environment, even those who are killed on the roadway. And it applies, you can actually help even spirits go through things. I find that something we forget is that those spirits in the liminal realm, those who are just across the veil from us, those like the Fae, they don't experience death in the same way, but they do experience transformation, right? If you've
Yes.
been existing in a Fae body for 1,000 years, you might get a little tired of that current incarnation. And so what happens with that consciousness, that spirit that is in that liminal being? Well, they're going to be transformed. And so some interesting, really interesting psychopomp work you can do there is actually to help Fae transform themselves into something new, leave their old vessel behind and transform into something new. So there's so many things to do with psychopomp work. And I find that ultimately it's one of these things where not enough people are doing it. We have 160,000 humans that die every day. And then when we're talking about farm animals, There's 900,000 cows that die every day, 1.4 million goats, 1.7 million sheep, 3.8 million pigs, 11.8 million ducks, and then 200 million chickens every day. So it's definitely, I love to see that more people are getting involved in psychopomp work because there's a lot of death that
There's a
happens
lot of
every
death.
day. There's a
And
lot.
those numbers, I'm assuming for the humans, those are probably just your average
That's
normal
the average
numbers,
day.
not
Yeah.
including things like illness or war or any of the terrible topics that nobody likes to really talk about, because we all like to pretend a lot of times like those things don't exist, which is really sad. But at the same time, we understand that we have a mental capacity that can only handle so much. So I'm assuming those numbers don't include that, because if they did, obviously I would think that would be a lot higher. That's why when you mentioned it, I was like, that seems small.
I think it includes, kind of sickness, but and old age and all this.
Mhm.
But uh, of course, any events like a terror attack or a or war, of course, yeah, it's going to bump those figures up in
Of course.
on that day. This is, of course, an average, right? A multi-year average.
Right. Yeah, of course. So, in terms of that, when you're talking about death work, let's kind of go into a little bit about what that looks like and what that sounds like, because somebody out there who's listening may not understand what is death work. How does that work? So, death work, from my perspective, is something that I've recently only gotten into in the last couple of years. Um, is often somebody who has reached out through um their kind of psychic abilities, and not saying everybody has psychic abilities, but more often than not you do, because you are communicating with those across the veil. And a lot of times it's people who are called to communicate with the dead to help them with their transition into the afterlife, whatever that may be. Some people call it, like, the liminal space, like a purgatory, which I think is very Christian in nature, but we're not. I don't like to limit that, because it's kind of a place where the spirit's stuck. And not only I don't always find that spirits are stuck. Sometimes I feel like spirits don't want to move on yet. They want to go explore. They want to understand what this new form feels like. And it's not that they're not ready to deal with their trauma or ready to, pass on to their, meet the reaper and go on into the next life, and also, or the next afterlife, wherever that may be for them. um Sometimes it's very benign. They just wanted to explore and go meet things like the fae or other beings, and kind of understand how the other side works. And so you have those spirits that are like, yeah, I've been exploring for the last like 300 physical human years, and or 3000, however many you'd like to do. And that's their thing. And they're like, now I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to go. I'm ready. We can do this now. And they come to you as a death worker in a usually trance state, saying, I'm ready for your assistance to help. And sometimes they do have still leftover trauma to work through, and other times they just need you to connect them to who they need to move on through their afterlife. Then you have other spirits who have experienced significant trauma or are recently dead, or both, who need you to kind of help be a little bit of a therapist, a friend, a counselor of sorts, and to kind of help them understand that, yes, you are dead. Yes, this has happened to you, and help them kind of work through some of the trappings of their soul, the trauma they experienced, and get them ready to let it go of their, basically their earthly ties of sorts, so that they can move on. And sometimes even after working on trauma, they're like, I'm not ready to go to my afterlife. I would like to go explore. I'd like to kind of get used to this form. And again, that's okay. As a death worker, you're not supposed to hinder that. You're supposed to be like, when you're ready, if I'm still here, come on back. If you're not, whoever comes behind me will be who you look for, kind of thing. And so it's one of those states where you do get to work with that. You also get to work with a lot of the, I call them the death helper spirits, and those would be like reapers or attendants of certain death deities, essentially they would also be known as psychopomps as well, that help those spirits kind of be guided to a place that us as humans who are still on this earth are not allowed to go. We're not allowed to pass through those realms yet because we're still alive. And in that regard, it's makes it to where you get to have that fulfilling experience of helping them, but at the same time it can also be very taxing because there is a lot of dead. There's a lot of people who are like, oh, you can see me, you can hear me, you can talk to me, you can help me, etc., etc., etc. And then you do get some spirits that you're like, this is above my pay grade, I cannot help you with this, but I can put you in contact with a deity who can, or a spirit who can. And sometimes the things that they ask for are just too big, too outlandish. I've had spirits that are like, hey, can you go find my husband who's, still on earth that lives in Italy? And it's like, no, I cannot physically do that. That would be a weird conversation to have for starters. But secondly, no, I cannot do that. I can't help you with that. But I can help you have the understanding that they are probably okay and they're probably moving on in their best of abilities. Not to say that, once people die, you're forgotten. But, you do have to continue living on this side. So that's kind of an understanding a little bit of how death work is. And a lot of times, death work is not, you can choose to be a death worker, but a lot of times it's a calling. It's a lot of times a deity will come to you or a spirit will come to you and say, you have the gift for this and you would probably be pretty good at it. Do you accept this? Because it can be very mentally and emotionally and physically taxing as well.
Yes, it's often a calling, it's true. Or maybe you don't know it yet, but if you're someone that had if you're someone that when you were a child you were able to see spirit, or maybe later on in life you just started to have a lot of paranormal experience and a
Mhm.
spirit experience, then it's kind of a little nudge to you to see if you are someone that would open your doors to that kind of work eventually.
Yes, I believe that is also very true. And um, maybe you're somebody that works really well in the paranormal scene. Paranormal work, as long as you are not men who screams at ghost in basement, um, and tries to force religious icons down other spirits' throats, then yes, going into haunted spaces to help them heal, to help them move on, to help them understand, that is also considered psychopomp and death work. So, is it always warranted and wanted? No, but it can be. And I would say if that's somebody that's like, oh, well, I like to go to haunted spaces, that's great. That's wonderful, as long as you're respectful. If you are not
Yes.
respectful of the dead, I say this also with love, you have no business being there.
Yes, same with cemetery too.
Yeah. If you're not going to be respectful of those who have passed on, it'd be kind of like somebody coming into your space, into your house, and, in your bubble essentially, and screaming at you in religious icons, or saying, talk to me, talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. We wouldn't want that as living humans. Why should we assume that the dead would want that either?
Exactly.
So be respectful, be understanding. And if you're not getting anything, they probably don't want to talk to you.
I would
So,
also add that one of the worst things you can do in psychopomp work is to force a spirit to pass to the other side.
oh
You
gosh, yes,
can
don't do
offer
that.
it to them and you can talk with them, you can explain their situation for them, right? There's many reasons why a spirit might be lingering on that other side of the veil, right? So I find it's a multi-step process where once a spirit, once someone passes, their spirit is still lingering in what Laova and I like to call the liminal realm, right? It's that dimension, let's say, that's right beside us. It's still anchored in the physical world, right? But
Mhm.
it's across that veil of perception where we can't see them, but they're certainly aware of us. And this is something that we find, let's say, in a haunted house, right? So those spirits there are in that liminal realm. They're not in the spirit world itself. They haven't moved on to the realm of the ancestors, right? And
Right.
there's a lot of reasons why they might stay in that liminal realm. They might have unfinished business. They might have some attachment to this world that they, for instance, when a parent passes away, they might stay around because they want to see what happens with their kids and to see that everything turns out for them, right? Taking care of others can be a big part of it. Or there's even many cases, and in fact, I've come across this. It isn't just kind of this old cliche. There's spirits who hang around because there's some hidden financial source that, like buried treasure, that they want their heirs to find, and so they're going to stick around until that happens. I've actually encountered mediums who have helped people to actually clear that kind of thing out. That there's this contractual dispute that's happening in the family, and they're sticking around until the will is found, this kind of thing. Ultimately, it can take time for spirits to process that unfinished business, to move through what they're doing. And so ultimately, the best thing you can do is just give them the option, fill them in on their situation, explain to them that they are dead. I've known many psychopomp practitioners who have gone into haunted buildings and they find a child that's been there for 20 years, and they're just completely lost. Like, they don't
Of
know what's
course.
happened, they don't understand it. And so in that situation, what you would do is you'd explain to the child, look, your parents are on the other side now, and this can be like even 50 years later, right? So explain to them that their parents are on the other side and that they can go and join them, and really explain to them the process ahead of them, and that they're safe, that's going to be okay, but they just, they need to pass over. And so you really have to explain that to them, and then respect their own free will. Even in a case where there's a very negative entity, right? You can act to
Mhm.
contain them and all this, but and you can ask their guides to help them out. But I'm very much against this way of doing things that you see on all these ghost shows, where it's like, okay, you're a demon and I send you to the other side.
Ugh.
It's like, this is very harmful for them, because all spirits are going through a process, and it can take time. It can take time for that first, after you pass, you can be in the liminal for a while, and then you have to allow them to move through whatever is keeping them here. And if it's confusion, you can certainly clear that up. If it's they have to get a message to a loved one, you can even help with that. Or you can suggest other ways that they can accomplish that, such as coming through to that loved one through dreams, right? It's important to have boundaries as a psychopomp worker.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can be sent on all these little mini errands to connect with the living. And that doesn't always go well, right? So you can suggest other things to the spirits, because they're not always thinking rationally, right? They're sometimes lost in a bit of a dream world, and so they're operating with dream logic, and they don't quite realize, hey, I shouldn't really ask this medium to go talk with this person because it might
Yeah.
not go well. And so you just can explain to them, look, hey, you have the option of coming through in a dream for this person. You can do all these things, right? So sometimes you just have to give them ideas for how they can work out their stuff. And so this is a process that goes on for at least a year, really, if not decades or centuries in
It
some
can be
cases.
decades, yeah.
And then I really like to clarify that even when they pass over to the other side, it's not over. Their healing is not over. They're going to be with their guides, they're going to be with their ancestors, and then they're going to be led through this rigorous process of healing, of healing the old ego. So even when they pass over initially, they're not going to be these enlightened beings. They might still be held back by the limitations of the ego, those patterns of thought and being that they established in life. And so this is why ancestral healing is actually so important, because yes, just because your ancestors have passed on doesn't mean that they are completely healed. And in fact, let's say you had especially in shamanism, we find this a recurring motif that even if you had an ancestor who, let's say, had an alcohol problem, they can be on the other side and they can actually be influencing their descendant to engage in similar patterns, fulfilling that kind of ego desire through the descendant. So this is why ancestral healing is so important, because there are unhealed ancestors out there. So another part of psychopomp work that's quite interesting to engage in is that ancestral healing, helping all of the ancestors of your line to really work through all the problems they had in life. And when you do that, you're really clearing up this ancestral field within you. This is a topic that Peter Mark Adams has highlighted a lot in his work. And that is that ancestral field is a part of you. You cannot cut yourself off from your ancestors. You can create barriers for a while, but ultimately you need to heal that field, because it actually is a part of you. You know, you have your mind, body, soul, energy body, and but then you also have that ancestral body, that ancestral field that is with you and with all your living family. And this really is this kind of group spirit, or this group egregore that is living with you. And so clearing that up is incredibly important. And then the other thing I like to clear up with people is that just because you're dead doesn't mean you're all knowing. It's really, it's not like, you know, the movie Beetlejuice,
Yeah.
where yeah, they get the guide for the recently deceased. Unfortunately, that is not a thing. And just because the spirits pass over, it doesn't mean that they know everything about how the universe works. They can be receiving uh, in bite-sized portions from their guides and from other spirits the information that they need to heal, but they don't need that all-knowingness, right? They can be, in fact, that might even be negative for their healing process if they're overloaded with information. They just have to know how to heal, and that's what they're being led through. So when we connect with ancestors and other spirits, I have found that it can be a detriment to base too much of one's metaphysics on what what ancestral spirits or formerly embodied spirits are telling us. And I think this was a bit of a failing of, let's say, spiritism, or the spiritualism, the way that mediumship was being practiced
Oh, right. Yeah.
in the late 19th century,
Victorian
where
spiritualism.
yeah, where it's like, okay, you're talking with spirits who aren't fully healed and don't have a full
No.
metaphysical understanding of what's going on, but we're basing this cosmology that we're getting from that on these conversations, right? So that I find that can be a bit of an issue too, in that they don't know and everything, and in fact they're even getting kind of a mediated reality based on what they can understand at any time, right? So they can tell you about
Mhm.
that, but they can't tell you about the grand questions of life, let's
It's
say.
like, tell me about my daughter who's gonna die or whatever. And it's like, the spirit's like, I don't even know you. Like, what? I do want to kind of back up to something that you said earlier about,
Certainly.
the negative spirits and, coming in and asking unrealistic things or not being super kind. Um, as a death worker or as a psychopomp worker, whichever terminology you would like to use, it is a wise thing for you to actually have boundaries. And you can tell a spirit no. You can even tell a spirit no and fuck off. I have many times, because they were offensive, they were cruel, they didn't want to listen to anything I wanted to say or had to say or tried to accept any of the help that I was giving them. And when you start kind of butting heads really hard with a spirit, that spirit is not in a place where they're going to accept help. And that is kind of one of those moments where it's like, that's above my pay grade. You don't get to treat me this way. It's kind of like it, you don't want a human to treat you that way in real life. you don't get to let a spirit treat you that way either. And having those moments where you're like, I'm going to set this boundary. You are not going to treat me this way. And if you cannot communicate with me, it is at that point you can say you need to leave. If they don't leave because they think that they are God's gift or whatever, at that point, yes, it is safe for you to send them somewhere else out of your vicinity so that they can't interact with you. At that moment, then it is okay to do that. But it's also one of those things of saying, hey, we have provided X, Y, and Z resources to you. If you are not ready to accept that, then you need some time on your own with your own thoughts to figure your stuff out. And that's okay.
I couldn't agree more. Boundaries are such an important part of this process as a psychopomp, and to keep your own sanity. It's so important to really, one, engage in self-care and not do things that are just going to trouble your mind to the point where you're no good to anyone, right? It's just like in on an airplane, you put your own mask on before helping others, and so you gotta take care of yourself. And absolutely, you gotta have boundaries with the spirits because they can ask a lot of things. It's happened many a time that Lauva wakes up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and she's rushed by a spirit, coming right up to her, and she's has to say, "Look, I will address your situation in the morning, but right now I'm off." This is
I am
we have office
sleeping.
hours here.
We do have
And
office hours. You must abide by them. If you cannot abide by them, seek a different office.
and something I'm always telling fledgling mediums who are just starting to experience this spirit contact is put in office hours, have boundaries, because otherwise a lot of new mediums are being, or people who their powers are just awakening,
Mhm.
is they have this experience of spirits coming to them all the time, and it can be an overwhelming experience. And I liken it to being a psychologist and having an office where you don't have a door, you don't have a personal assistant out there making sure, limiting who gets through. And so, yeah, you have your office, but you have, four spirits in the room with you. Two are sitting on a couch, one's sitting on your desk, the other one's pacing back and forth. And then there's a whole bunch of other spirits looking through the door, looking for their time. It's overwhelming, and you can't help
Yeah.
anyone that way. So you got to put those boundaries in place. You got to say, okay, one spirit at a time. I have certain times that I actually will see spirits. And then, okay, there's a waiting room, and you can have your guardian spirit basically acting as or any kind of helping spirit guide, acting as a personal assistant out there in the waiting room, making sure, limiting who gets through, and then giving that order to your practice. And I've seen this so many times, and so I always put it out there that these boundaries are so important. And so if you're a new medium who's encountering this kind of stuff, set those boundaries because they're going to help you keep your sanity.
The other thing too is especially if you're a new medium, and all the things are awakening and you're excited and you're like, wow, this is really cool, this is really fun, this is really enjoyable. The newness will wear off eventually and it will become annoying. So learning to set those boundaries early, even if you're like, this is really cool and I don't care that it's on all the time. Trust me, you will when it starts interfering with your sleep and you're trying to, do your job, and there's a spirit that is in your brain tapping on your brain nonstop saying, pay attention to me, let me talk to you, let me do this thing, because they don't understand the human constraints that we have. We have to go to work, we have to take care of our kids, our homes, our families, or blah, 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 all the other stuff. When they don't realize that because maybe they have forgotten because they've been dead that long, or maybe they just don't care, they are impatient and want your attention right now, that is when those boundaries really come into play. And you have to have that firm no, not now. This is when I'm available. This is when we can do this. And also for new mediums, especially if you're really good with trance work and visualization, what has helped me personally, and the fellow death workers that I also work with, is setting up a kind of liminal astral space, like almost like an office of sorts or a meeting place where there's a waiting area for those spirits to come, and they can sit and they can wait until you are available and you are in that space, and you say, now I'm here, now we can take one at a time. And you can have a guardian spirit, bring one spirit in, you help them, and then they go about their business, or they come in for their therapy session, as you call it. Because healing does take time. It is not always a one and done. Sometimes it is, not always. And so they can go back into the waiting area, or they can go about their business, and when they're ready to come back for their next session, they can. And having that kind of designated space, even if it's a liminal astral space, um, is okay. You can set up a physical space too. Let's say that, there's a bench in your backyard during summertime that you can go sit on. And when you're sitting there meditating, or, ready to commune, spirits know they can come to that space and sit with you and have that interaction. Is it always going to be available to you? Yeah, if you set it up that way. But it's only available when you are ready and available to go help them. Never, I think Judika Isles said it best, and I think she actually said it best on one of her episodes on the show, that when it comes to the time that you spend with spirit, it should be about 20%, because the other 80% is your life that you should be living and realizing. You cannot spend all the time in the spirit world, and that includes deity work and working with your own guides and doing your own magical work outside of the psychopomp and death work. Yes, that can be a very large part of it, but you also have to maintain your own connections and your own relationships outside of that. And then also maintaining your physical life. You are in this body, you are on this earth, you are meant to live this life. You are not meant to be a beck and call for spirits. And yes, you may be called to help them, but that doesn't mean it has to be 100% what you do 24/7. And making sure that you are turning that off, giving your brain time to rest, and giving your brain even time to say, now I'm not looking at the synchronicities. Now I'm not looking at these signs and spirits. Now I am taking a break for me, and I'm living my life and doing what I need to do. That is more important a lot of times than being available in the spirit or the astral space for those spirits.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And the other thing to realize is that that 20% is still huge. It's
Oh
still
gosh,
it's
yes.
giving
That's
them a
still a
lot
lot.
of your time, right? I mean, think about the things in your life that you spend 20% of your time on. That's a huge number, right?
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, one particular boundary to have is no spirits while driving. I've
Oh
known
gosh,
a
yes.
medium who almost got into a car accident because she was rushed by a spirit while driving. And you want that faculty turned off when you're operating heavy machinery, that's for sure. And another thing is, going back to something you said, was absolutely, it doesn't always have to be you who's helping a spirit cross over. There's a lot of other guides and deities and spirits who are involved in psychopomp work. So if you ever feel like something is outside of your pay grade, or you just don't have time for it right now, you can call upon those guides. And let's say you even have a spirit who doesn't want to leave a haunted house, right? You can say, okay, I'm going to leave you alone here. You know that you're dead. You understand the situation, but you still want to stay here. Okay. But I'm still going to ask that your guides are present with you and are there to help you eventually come to the right decision to move on. So you can definitely call in backup, or even, let's say you're not a shamanic practitioner, or a death worker, or someone who has the tools. If you have a spirit that you need to pass over, you can definitely call upon their own guides, their own ancestors, to come pick them up, to come bring them to the other side. That's a very effective way of doing it if you're just kind of a layman in these things. And so you just, pray to your own guides, but then pray to their guides and ancestors to come pick them up. It works very, very well. You just ask for them to receive that healing. And ultimately, that's the thing about psychopomp work. It really, in my mind and in my practice, it's very much about healing. It's even the worst being out there, right, is there because of the life it led, the trauma, the experiences that it came in and experienced during this life. And so ultimately, when they pass, it is this process of healing. And there's different waypoints along that journey. And absolutely, your astral waiting room that you mentioned is something that we use in our shamanic practice a lot. Where if you have a spirit who, okay, they're ready to move away from the liminal realm, from the house that they're haunting, let's say, but they're not quite ready to go all the way to the other side of the spirit world. Well, you can put them into kind of a waiting room in within your shamanic journey. You can create this space for them
Mhm.
that they can then inhabit, and you can actually start putting a lot of spirits there who, for instance, Laova was once working with a lot of child spirits
Mhm.
who were not ready to head over. They wanted to explore more. So she created a gigantic astral playground for them
We do
to
that too.
yeah, and it's very, very effective. And so there's a lot of things that you can do in this journey, but I find the most important thing to remember is that it is about the healing of that person. And so even the worst of us, even the absolute worst human being will eventually heal on that other side, and it just might take a while. and and so that's ultimately the process that I see that we are engaging in as psychopomp practitioners. We're helping spirits get that healing. And so that, coming full circle, that's why I find it so disturbing when a ghost hunter is just sending these beings off and not caring
I don't
about.
even know if they're really sending them off more than
I
pissing
don't
them
think they
off.
are.
I
Yeah,
think they're pissing them off more than sending them off, to be honest. But I mean,
I would agree with you. Absolutely. It's I think the biggest thing you can have while doing this is compassion for these spirits. And even if they're real nasty beings, putting them in the hands of people, of beings, spirits who will help them heal. You find with near death experiences so much, there's this concept of the life review where you see your life, but you also, in every action that you took, but you also see your life from the perspective of those who you harmed. And so you see, okay, I was really nasty to this cashier on this one day. And now you see the effect that you had from her own eyes. You see the effect that that had within the family. Let's say that she yelled at her kid later that day because of the experience that you caused in her. And now you're going to see the suffering that that caused for that child. And then you're going to see how that snowballed in this butterfly effect into the suffering that that brought in life. And I find that that type of past life review and also that type of psychopomp spirits giving a recently deceased person this context as to their actions really causes even the most psychopathic person to break through that psychopathy and really realize, wow, I've done horrible things. I want to atone. And then also it opens up the spirit dwelling within to start letting go of that ego and letting go of all those attachments from life, all the bigotry and the hate and the attachments and the greed, and really just be ready to move on from that and say, okay, I realize I did that. This vessel really did horrible things. I am not the vessel, and I'm ready to move on to a place where I am pure spirit. And so ultimately, I feel that that is the end result, the goal of all this psychopomp work. And so, yes, it is disturbing to see psychopomp work being done by people who just want to. It's almost like just vacuuming your house, right? Get rid of anything that's there and send it on. It's like, no, I care about the dirt that I'm I
it's
want to
like
see this
you
dirt
vacuumed
flourish.
up my mother's diamond earring in the process of that because you weren't paying attention to what you were doing. Yeah, that's kind of what the blanket, you are evil kind of thing. If you're haunting a space, you have to be evil. You have to be, all these things. But we don't realize that some people or some spirits aren't necessarily quote unquote haunting a place. They're stuck in a death state. They're stuck in a trauma space. They are stuck because that space, even when it was vibrant and beautiful in the way that it was home, was comfort, and it doesn't have to be, a good space. We see sometimes a lot of prisons are haunted, not necessarily because of the torture. Yes, sometimes that is the case, but because they don't know where else to go. That was what they knew for so long. And so leaving that is almost a traumatic experience because they don't know what's next. They don't know how to deal with that. And so going into those spaces to deal with those spirits and then yelling at them and saying, Jesus Christ, I rebuke you, blah, 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 whatever the heck they do, or, performing a Catholic exorcism on them when they may not even have been Catholic, um, is at best insulting and at worst traumatizing. Um, and you may be doing more damage by doing those kinds of practices. And so that kind of brings us a little bit to um, the understanding of healing in those spaces too, and create kind of talking a little bit about those liminal spaces that we were talking about that have those waiting areas. You can also set off a space where you can do the healing work, where the spirits who really do need those kind of healing modalities, those healing practices, not just the talk therapy essentially, or the understanding of it, but also to heal spiritual wounds, psychic wounds, even the physical wounds that they experienced while alive. Having those spaces where you can do that kind of work, and even having other psychopomps kind of spirits who are willing to help you, which may actually be other human spirits that are like, I was really good at this when I was alive and I would like to help others. I'm not ready to move on to the afterlife. I want to do this. And that's okay too. That's perfectly fine if they want to have a purpose outside of their afterlife to help themselves heal because they need to do the service, they need to do the work. That's okay as long as you're not exploiting them and you have that understanding of you do this as long as you need and as long as you want and you find fulfillment in it. But the moment that stops happening, we need to address it and you need to figure out what's next for you. And if I can help with that, great. If I can't, I will find somebody else who can help you with that. Maybe it's calling in their ancestors, maybe it's, calling in a deity to help you. And then there's other spirits that you find that have so much hatred and trauma in on them that you realize it will take your lifetime to try to help them unpack. And it's okay in those moments, also as a death worker and a psychopomp worker, to say, this is too much. Your mental health matters, not only just in spirituality and the physical world and everything, but in this kind of work as well. Your mental health definitely matters. And if it's too big for you, it's too much, it's too triggering even, it's okay to say, I can't help you. I can't do this. And then you call in somebody else. And maybe that is a death deity to say, this is way too much. I can't do this. Can you help take them somewhere else or help them? And then they're most of the time, the death deity, in my experience, will come in and say, I got it. I will take them where they need to go. I will help them if I can, these kinds of things. It's making sure that you are willing to also delegate when you need it. But having that space for healing is kind of where I would like to kind of bridge into the next aspect of death work. And that is having healing modalities also under your belt. A lot of times we see this in shamanic work where it's, finding soul shards or soul pieces that have been broken and helping them go back into place, or helping them understand the wounds that they have and doing psychic healing of the wounds, which might encompass modalities like Reiki or energy healing. And sometimes they just need someone to be compassionate and send them love. Love is just as much as healing as any of the other things, especially in the spiritual terms. So having those kind of understandings of how that works is always a good idea. Now, if you're somebody out there that's like, I'm not a Reiki practitioner, I don't even know how to do that. Well, you can become one if you choose to. But there are also different forms of energy healing that don't require you to have basically a study in an attunement and those kinds of things that you can self-teach. And that's okay too. Whatever you're comfortable with. And I would recommend, if you are interested in Reiki, seek out somebody who can help you. Eric and Laova also, I believe, teach that, if I'm correct. I do too, just not as often, but they do teach that, I believe, at the Spirit World Center. So shameless plug. um, but in those regards, as you're learning these healing modalities, healing spirit is very similar to healing humans. It can be one of those moments where you're just sitting in front of the spirit and you're doing the Reiki session with them. And they may have similar responses to a human that might in the physical. They might have moments of peace, or they might have a full cathartic release where they just cry and cry and cry because they need to release whatever it is that they're holding on to. I've had spirits shout and yell and scream, not directed at me per se, but they have done that because they had so much anger and hostility that they were holding on to. And the Reiki just kind of helped move it out so that they could have a release of it and allow them to get it out in a healthier manner than taking it out on other people, or other spirits or other beings. And that's so, it's such a interesting experience when you see that happen. And then also to have some of your death deities who you do work with, that help you in your own practice and help guide you, lead you into spaces where you can learn what this looks like and what it means and how important these healing modalities and death truly can be, to help a spirit find what's next for them. And sometimes, yeah, it is becoming that true form of spirit, but sometimes they also want to go back and see if they can do it better. And reincarnation is an option as well, for those who believe in it. Not all believe in it, and that's okay. But yeah, there is a lot that can happen in these kinds of healing practices.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's useful to clarify what we mean by healing here. And you already mentioned a good portion of it. There's many ways to express the type of healing that a spirit needs. One way is the shamanic way of expressing it, which is that through life and because of trauma, you can experience soul loss, right? Where
Mhm.
literally a part of your consciousness breaks away, and it breaks off with so that it contains the felt experience of some kind of traumatic event, so that the remaining consciousness isn't doesn't need to live that or throughout its life, right? It's almost a form of dissociation of a part of your consciousness actually moving off into somewhere in the spirit world so that you don't have to face it every day. And so that of course is something that can be addressed in life, but also it can be addressed for spirit. And ultimately you have a lot of spirits who are on the other side who have suffered significant soul loss, and even another term called power loss, where they're not at full power because of the trauma that they had. They don't have that energy in them that really gives you the energy to do things, right? So an
Mhm.
example of power loss in life is, let's say you have a job that you hate and it just doesn't align with who you truly are, your true path in life. And so you can start to feel more and more run down and sad and lost. And that ultimately is this loss of power within you, right? So soul loss and power loss are definitely two things that can be addressed through the healing of a spirit. And it's very good to do this before you send it over to the other side, because in fact, we find at least that when they are in that liminal state, it's a lot easier for them to heal those things. And of course, it's even if you pass them without that, okay, it becomes a matter of ancestral healing at that point. And so it can be addressed, but I find it becomes a bit more solidified if you don't get it right away. Now, the other thing I would say is that you don't have to approach these things through a shamanic lens, right? I mean,
Mhm.
soul loss and power loss, okay, it's the shamanic way of describing this, but there's many other ways to address it. And something I find even in life is that things like talk therapy can cause spontaneous soul retrieval, because you're talking through something that was traumatic and you're coming to terms with it. And now, okay, that shard of your soul feels that it can come back because things are safe, and so it wants to return. That's the thing. So absolutely what you're saying there, of even just giving love to a spirit, it can empower that spirit, and it can also act as a form of talk therapy, where it is or any other kind of intervention, where it's going to cause that all the parts of that being to want to come back together, because it feels better about life, it feels safe. And once you're dead, you really don't have a lot to worry about, right? So it can lead to an understanding of that on the spirit side, can lead it to just chill, I suppose, and allow all these different parts of it to come back to it. So ultimately, when we're talking about healing, yeah, it is about coming to terms with one's life and allowing the the full structure of that spirit to just come back together. And yeah, that can be accomplished in so many different ways. And something that we've been saying again and again in this episode is, it doesn't have to be you. In other words, if you find a spirit and it needs healing, you can call upon its healed ancestors, you can call upon its guides, and they will start healing that being. You just have to act as that mediator to bring them together, and then you just you put them in the room to discuss and negotiate, and they'll come to some understanding, right? But honestly, who wants you to heal more than anyone else? It's probably your healed ancestors, because you are their descendant. They, of all the spirits, they really, really have direct vested interest in you. And so if you call upon healed ancestors, they are going to make things happen. And so it's a process of healing that's going to happen in some way. And you can do that shamanically, you can do that through Reiki, you can do that through just talking with the spirit, literally, or calling upon their guides. But it's the natural thing to happen in that spirit. And so you just have to do something that will get the ball rolling on that.
Now, I'm will play a little bit of devil's advocate, because I'm sure there's somebody out there that's going to ask, when while listening to this episode, what if there are no healed ancestors? And in that regard, you call upon your healed ancestors of your own, your guides, and so forth, deity. And then if there's nobody in the family lineage that's like, yeah, I can help, and kind of figure it out at that point in time. And yes, there are some family lineages that are just full of toxicity and have a lot of baggage that they are still working through and will work through for many, many years and centuries. And that doesn't mean that they are awful, horrible human beings. I'm sure that there will be somebody that will come along and break all those generational ties and curses and chains and everything in between and help start that healing process. But if everybody is being taught the same mindset throughout generations of being, terrible or mean or cruel, or this is the way that we do this, that they are above everyone else, or they have a more entitled viewpoint, yeah, it does create a toxic environment, not only for the people that are living, but also for the people that have died. And so sometimes you do run across those people that are like, there isn't anybody. And so having your own spiritual team, whether it be your guides, your ancestors, spirits you have helped and encountered that are like, I would like to stay and work alongside you and be on your team and help, that's when that plays out. And even then, if you're still like, this is too much for me, that's when you can ask deity to take over. They will find somebody, if not themselves, to do it, to help this person and help them move on. There is a whole wealth of people and beings and things out there in the liminal and the astral that we humans really can't comprehend. Like we have small little brains. Like some of us have really large understandings, but even then that is maybe like 2% of the understanding of the spiritual world. We just can't comprehend it. It's too big. Not to say that that's a bad thing. That's okay. What we do understand, what we do comprehend at that point, it's like there is somebody else out there that can help. There always is. And that's okay for you to say, I can't do it. It's okay. And I, when it comes to working through that ancestral healing as well, if you have people in your own ancestral lineage that you're just like, they were horrible. Like that person, I can 100% based off of who they were in their life and the family lineage that I know that they just were an awful human being. That's okay. That might be the person you want to start with breaking some of those ties. And I'm not saying ties as in, like you shouldn't go no contact with the spirit. It's more of helping them break through the ties of what made them think that behavior while they were alive, and maybe even that behavior in death is okay, and helping them heal through that. And I think that that's a big thing that a lot of times when it comes to spirit work and death work and ancestral work, because we always say if you have bad ancestors you don't have to work with them. No, you don't. But at the same time, should we be leaving them out in the cold to continue thinking that it's okay? And you were talking about how the ancestors, who might have had a drinking problem could influence the family line that's now currently living. And it's something that you also see when you were talking about the near-death experiences, where they were seeing the influence of their actions. If you've ever read a book that's called Uncrossing by Katrina Rasbolt, she actually talks about how having the simple act of road rage, even with your windows held rolled up and they can't hear you and you're just screaming at the other person, that energy that you're sending out still can hit them or even hit a bystander. It's kind of like spraying a range of bullets out there. Not even with that whole intent of saying, oh, I was aiming at the target, but you also got, the squirrel that was in the tree because you weren't really paying attention to how you were shooting. You were just shooting blindly. And that's a lot of times how sometimes, and I'm not saying that we can't have negative energy. Of course, we're human. We will have the balance, but understanding that, yes, sometimes our energy does have ramifications and can influence others doesn't mean that we can't try to be better. And it's not so much that I don't want to dip too deeply into the Wiccan kind of things of do no harm, because that gets a little bit back into that toxicity of love and light that we've talked about in previous episodes. But I do want to understand that, yes, there are times where your energy can have a negative influence on somebody. And, kind of like you had a bad day. So you come home and you're in a bad mood because your boss was just an asshole to you. And then everybody in your household is suddenly having a bad day. Your boss didn't interact with them, but you did. And so your energy that you're putting out and your negativity that you're putting out is influencing everyone else. Is it always going to be that way? No. Sometimes you'll come home and you're like, I don't need that anymore. I'm letting it go. And that's okay. So I think in terms of the spiritual aspects, understanding that, yes, we do have spirits in our ancestral field and spirits that we will come across as death workers and psychopomp workers that will put us in a bad mood, that will just have that energy about them, and that will also need a lot of healing work. And understanding that when you're going into it, being like, this isn't my energy, I did not accept this, this is not me, and letting that go the moment you finish that interaction, going, that was them, this is not me, this does not affect me, I'm not holding on to it, and allowing that to dissipate into whatever cleansing aspect you'd like, which cleansing with this work is highly important, as well as boundary and protection work. But understanding that aspect is so huge, and it can also be just as beneficial to the spirit you're working with, to going, you're in a bad mood and I get it, I understand it, but why are you in the bad mood? Are you in a bad mood because of stuff that happened when you were alive, or are you in a bad mood because you've been stuck in the state for the last 60 years? And that's a really important question to always ask. Are you mad because you're here, or are you mad because you died? Like, which one is it?
Yeah, context is always so incredibly important when working with the spirits. And when you are working with the spirit and you don't have context, you can always do something that is very counterproductive. If we operate based on a gut reaction, well, not even a gut reaction, because that implies intuition, but if we act on kind of this instinctual reaction of fear, and then it can lead to very counter contrary results to what we actually want. And so, yeah, context is so important. And yeah, regarding a number of the things you said, one, absolutely, even if you don't have any ancestors within the last memorable generations, the last like 5 generations or so, you definitely have your guides, and they are always there for you. I mean, they've been there since your birth, and you just have to let them in and allow them to care for you, right? But they also care about your free will. So if you have a spirit who has never worked with their guides and has just had their guides working in the background trying to do what they can, then you know they I know I've mentioned this on the show before, I'm sure, but it's like, okay, if you haven't invited your guides to take part in your life, then they're just looking at you having a bad day. They're saying, oh, Brittany's having a really bad year this year, but she might be choosing to have that might be her life plan for now. So we can't violate her free will by making things go better, but or giving her guidance or playing with any probabilities. But the moment that you invite them in, they're like, yes, okay, we can finally get involved. And so this also applies to the afterlife, where if a spirit learns, okay, they have guides who care about them and can help them, absolutely, that can start changing things. And I would also encourage people to who are disturbed by the fact that they don't have any ancestors in the historical period that they can look back to and say, okay, that person was healed and they're there for me. Just remember that, even if you just go back 10 generations, you have about 1024 ancestors, and that starts going exponentially larger uh, by every generation after that. 11 generations back or so, you have somewhere around 2000 ancestors, 4000, 8000, 16,000. So I would say you really only need one good ancestor who's healed to help you in this process. So statistically, you got someone who cares about you. It's
Mhm.
just that you have to allow for a larger scope. If you're saying, okay, I want to be helped by my grandmother, by my great grandmother, okay, that you're introducing a constraint on yourself that might not lead to you finding that help. But I guarantee you that you have at least some healed ancestors, at least from a million years ago. You have some Homo sapien who you are the descendant of, who has their stuff together on the other side, and so you can definitely uh, find your healing with them if you expand the scope of what you consider an ancestor. But of course, that really is something that has to happen internally, because that
Mhm.
is, a self-imposed limitation of the ego when we say, okay, I'm connected with my ancestors, but maybe you're only thinking, okay, ancestors going back, 5 generations. But at the same time, there are a lot of past ancestors will that will care. But something else you're saying is something that I find so important, and that is, it's so important to be mindful of what ancestors you're reaching out to, right? One of the
Mhm.
first things we tell our students is, be careful when you're getting guidance from any unhealed ancestors, because absolutely any kind of bigotry or hatred or jealousy or greed that existed in them in life might be unhealed now.
Mhm.
And that is going to influence their guidance. That's going to influence even how they help you, right? They might think, oh, well, what this person needs, what my descendant needs is this, but that what they think that you need might be coming from a place that is defined by their own preferences and their own prejudices. And so that can lead to healing that also can be a bit discombobulating. But at the same time, and things like ancestral healing allow for such positive change on the other side, because there's also this kind of domino effect that's so curious that happens with ancestral healing, where let's say that all the problems in your family line go back to a a soldier who fought in the in the battle in 1066. They fought at the Battle of Hastings, let's say,
Mhm.
and they get back home. They're no longer on campaign, and they have shell shock, right? Or they have that trauma from the war, and now they are, mean to their family. They are introducing that trauma that they picked up in war, and they are spreading that down through the generations. And absolutely, it is common to find situations where, most of your ancestors are healed after, prior to 1000 AD, just because they've been working on themselves for 1,000 years on the other side. But at the same time, you can find a strain of ancestors that are your direct ancestors coming down since a historical event like that. And you think about how tough life was in the Middle Ages,
Right.
how it was very much Game of Thrones. And so the small folk, if you will, they were very much on the receiving end of terror and horror that we cannot even imagine. And so the amount of trauma that was introduced into our collective memory there is immense. And so the interesting thing about ancestral healing then, because we can really still be feeling these things, like you can feel like pent up rage that just comes from nowhere. And you might be feeling the rage that was passed down through your ancestral line for 1,000 years. So the wonderful thing though is that's actually very straightforward. Well, it's not going to take you 20 years to do. Let's put it that way, to heal your ancestors. It You basically go back and try to find the place where the trauma started. You go back to find that patient zero in your ancestral line. So in this case, it would be the soldier who returned from campaigns in 1066. And then you go and you heal them. Now, this has an interesting domino effect because it will then bring that spirit to start healing and forgiving and also apologizing to, especially apologizing to their descendants that came after them. And so it starts this healing going down the line. And
Mhm.
of course, this doesn't get rid of all the trauma in the family line, but it gets rid of the trauma that that individual started.
Right.
And of course, then there's going to be other things. 500 years ago, there was another war, there was something terrible that happened. And that would have also been introduced into the line. So it's not going to heal that part, but it'll start to heal like dominoes, the part that that soldier from 1066 started. And so it really is this it's kind of this inverted route, where instead of you got to nip things in the bud so that they don't then go and branch off into all this other trauma, because then when you snip it at that root, it just starts flowing and healing down that ancestral line to the descendants and ultimately to you. So that is very much the ancestral healing process that Laova and I engage in. And I gotta say, it's amazing the sources of things that you find, right? Like you might just have this rage that comes out of nowhere, or this addiction to food that comes out of nowhere, and or that seems to come out of nowhere. But in fact, it can be going back to a famine that occurred 300 years ago, a battle that occurred 700 years ago. And so by working with those ancestors that are that far back, you can actually feel those changes going on in yourself, because you're actually causing changes in that ancestral field, which is really very much a part of who you are. So it's wonderful work to engage in.
And I also kind of want to make a clarification too for people that are like, oh, but you moved on said spirit to their afterlife. That's it, they're done. They can't, have achieved the goals. Okay, well, here's the thing that I've seen and encountered through my own work, and I'm sure that Eric can attest for this as well, that yes, even though they have gone onto their afterlife and they have found peace after death essentially, or have found a place where they can do their work, their healing work, um that doesn't mean that they can't venture out back out of that afterlife and go to other areas and help other beings and explore. And basically we say that spirits go on vacation a lot, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're it's kind of like, even though some people are financially constrained and can't travel a lot, all of us have the ability to travel to different areas in the world, whether it be through help of um for example, like a wheelchair if you're disabled, or if you're able to afford it, or in all these other things. But there's still accommodations that we can all make. Spirits are the same way. Even if they're in their afterlife and they have found the peace and they found that relaxation after death, and we've done our job to help them get there, that's basically what death work is getting to them that point. After that, that is somebody else's job. That is above our pay grade. But once they get there, they are still able to say, hey, I'm going to take a break and go venture over here and go hang out with the Fae, or I'm going to go venture over here and help my other ancestors help with this other one, or I'm going to go over here and help this person out who needs assistance, and I want to kind of help work a little bit as a guide for them. They're able to do all that. That once they have found that point, that is, in their afterlife, they're still able and capable to do that. And we do have spirits that will do that, and have come across as, for example, my grandmother went to her afterlife, found her place, found her peace, and every now and then she comes back as a guide, as one of those ancestral spirits, to bestow some knowledge, to help figure stuff out, and then she goes back to her afterlife when she's done. It's not a capable thing of us saying, oh well, once they leave they can never go back. No, it's fluid and it's interesting, but it's also something that us humans with our cute little brains, we can't really comprehend because we're still living. And until we die, we really don't know 100% of how it works. We have understanding of what we're being told from those on the other side and what we get to see through trance and spirit, but even then it's still very limited. So having that capability of saying no, no spirit's allowed to do that after they go onto their afterlife, is a very limiting mindset as well, because we see spirits that have been out and about and they're like, hey, I'm this spirit from X, Y, and Z year that is long dead, but they're not needing anything. They just want to come and talk to somebody because they're just like, I wanted to see what y'all were about. I cannot tell you how many spirits have stopped by and just been like, y'all looked interesting. I just wanted to say hi. How's life? This is what I did in my life. Here's who I am. Here's when I lived. Here's what I'm doing now. And I don't need anything. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that they aren't at peace.
I think that's so important to reiterate that we absolutely do not have 100% understanding of what is going on the other side. And it's not just because we haven't looked into it enough or something. It literally is because our primate brains can't contain it. We cannot
Right.
understand in our current vessel. It's like trying to explain a human society to an ant. Even if it had some linguistic ability, it's just in that brain, it's not going to be able to comprehend what human mortgages are like, or what human love is like, or it won't be able to understand that. In the same way, we are constrained by the primate brain that we have. And so when the spirits tell us about what the other side is like, they're always speaking in metaphors. They're always speaking in symbols that we can understand. It's very much the same way that you or anyone would explain the financial markets to a 5-year-old. You're not going to talk about bonds and securities and time to return. You're not going to talk about it as you would as an adult understands it. Rather, you're going to use metaphors
Mhm.
and things that the child already understands in order to explain the general dynamics of the markets. So, for instance, if they really like baseball and they understand baseball, you're going to use baseball analogies in order to explain what the financial markets are like. Well, this is exactly what the spirits are doing with us. And this is also why there's such a wide range of understandings about what the afterlife is like, in that I personally find that, all these different religions, all these different spiritualities and traditions, it's like a whole bunch of different 5-year-olds getting all these different metaphors
Yeah.
for the same thing. And so ultimately, it's all right. It's just a different symbolic way of looking at it. And the spirits, when they're communicating with you, what they want is for interaction to happen, to communicate this wisdom and to communicate the general principles of healing and what it is to live a good life and all this. But they look inside the person, they look at their spiritual vocabulary and also their cultural context that they have. And so they're going to express themselves in a way that is working with that cultural context and that spiritual vocabulary. They're going to be talking the language of that person. And that can be a very different set of symbols from what they're giving someone else. And so absolutely, when we should not get so hung up on exactly what each one of these things we're talking about is, how many levels to the spirit world there is, or how many, what are the particular complexities, because we honestly are so far. There's a, what they call in philosophy of mind, there's a cognitive gap
Yes.
between between what is actually happening and what we can understand. For instance, I find that there's a lot of, to what a primate mind would find, would be a lot of paradoxes when it comes to the spirit world. So, for instance, let's talk about the spirit paradox you just mentioned, which is, how can grandma still be around even though she's also in the spirit world, right? Well,
Mhm.
this is a paradox to our primate mind. It's a paradox because we don't actually can't comprehend the the actual ultimate, because we're being constrained by things like primate rationality and primate logic. And something I like to say is, there's no reason that to assume that the other side conforms to human rationality or human logic at all. Logic could be a construct of this system, of this game that we're playing in the physical world, that does not translate at all to what is on the other side. And so if we try to use logic, it fails. We can't just sit down and say, okay, let's figure out what the spirit world is like using logic and reason, because these might be things that only exist within this construct of the physical world that we're living in, and that exists in our primate minds, but that have no bearing on what's out there. For instance, we also might ask, well, how did everything come to be, right? That's the ultimate question, right? Where did
That
everything come
that
from?
is too big of a topic.
Yeah, how, but what I've found when I ask that in channeling, right? I mean, how is there ever any how is there even the potential for anything to exist? Where did things arise from? How did it come to be? And the answer I got is from channeling, and I've gotten this many times, is, look, you are coming from this primate framework within this physical world where you have to have beginnings.
Mhm.
Why do you assume that in the ultimate reality that there has to be beginnings? It can have a completely different framework of operation that we can't even
We can't begin to fathom
begin
it, yeah.
to think about, right? So, anyways, long way of saying that, absolutely, even when there's paradoxes in terms of how we see the other side and in terms of the symbols that we receive and such, ultimately I explain those as, it's because how the we can't see that next level layer, and we are interacting with realities that contain principles and concepts and interactions and rules that we could never even hope to comprehend in this monkey mind. And so ultimately, don't beat yourself up if something doesn't make sense. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at with all this.
It's it's one of those things that when it comes to working with spirit, working with the ancestors, working with different realms, working with deity, working with death, it there's only so much of our minds that we have to understand, because we have to approach, kind of like you were saying, each different, third dimensional thing in a way that our brain can go, oh, I see what you're doing here. I kind of understand it. This makes a little bit sense, and I can see it if you put it in this way. But if you're trying to explain it in a whole other way, it's kind of like math. You have to explain it like 6 different ways to actually, have some people understand it. And having those kinds of moments where you're able to go, oh, I get it now. I understand. And then, also to explain it, bringing it back full circle to the spirits, sometimes spirits don't understand how things have changed in the modern world either. And so having to explain to them, like we often, a lot of times in our channeling work, we will use the Estes box or a spirit box. Not in the Ghost Bros kind of way. We do the Estes method, which is a lot better of a thing. If you don't know that, I highly recommend you learn about it. But in those kinds of moments that we have to explain to some of the spirits, because they're afraid of the box. They know it's there. They can see it being kind of visualized for them, because usually the person who's doing Estes will show the box in the liminal space as well, so they understand this is how you talk, what you do, talk to the silver stick that's sticking out of it, kind of thing. And we have to explain to them what it does. And sometimes it takes a minute for them to figure out. And especially what we've noticed too is if it's a non-human spirit, it takes even longer for them to figure out, because there's no reference point in their minds of what this does or how it works. So if it's human, we can say, oh, it's a radio signal, or oh, it helps transmute the words through this type of thing. And then they're like, oh, I get it now. I understand how to communicate through this now, and I can do that. And sometimes you will still come across things that are just like, I don't understand how that works, and it scares me, and I'm not talking through it, and it'll just be silence. And they will straight up say, I'm not talking through it. Which is fine. Then you go to the tried and true traditional channeled messages, or through other things that they might know, like maybe pendulum, or communicating through the tarot, or other different methods. So that way they are able to understand what works for them. And so it's kind of trying to figure it out. And it's always sometimes playing a guessing game of what form are they going to choose to communicate through. But yeah, it's one of those things that figuring it out is not always the easiest method, but explaining to them is also trying to get past that. How do I explain this to you so you get it? And then sometimes it's the reverse for this of, how do I answer this question so I don't break your little human brain? And
Exactly.
because some spirits are like, how do I explain the afterlife to you? Because a lot of people who start out with death work is like, tell me about the afterlife, tell me about heaven, tell me about X, Y, and Z. And they're like, they don't know how to comprehend telling it. It's not that I don't think that it's 100% that they can't, like it's some big secret. I think that there is a huge aspect of it that our consciousness in this form, in this human form, cannot comprehend. And so at that point, they're just like, oh, how do I explain this? And then they just kind of come up with words of like peace and rest and understanding. And, one word it kind of answers. And it's not so much that they don't have the capabilities of describing what it's like. It's more of, how do we explain this? And so if they do it in terms of things like feelings or experience, like rest, then it's like, oh, that's what it is for you. Okay, we can comprehend that that's what an afterlife is like for you. Um, because we've all done it in the beginning of all psychopomp and death work. We've all asked, what's the afterlife like? Can you tell us? And 99% of them don't really give a clear, concrete answer, because I don't think that they can convey it clearly for us. And it makes it very challenging in, when you watch like the Ghost Bros, and I'm not saying the Ghost Bros is in the TV show. I'm talking about like the guys who yell at the ghosts through the spirit box and all that. The bad ones, um, those ones. When you get to the people who do those kinds of more derogatory and harsh things to spirits, then you are the ones that also call everything a demon. Like they don't have the comprehension of that it might not be a demon, that it might actually be human, just in a bad mood, or it might actually be something that's not a demon, that is otherworldly, that is not human or otherkin or whatever else you would like to call it. And so having those kinds of understandings makes it easier for this kind of work, whereas those people don't have that kind of understanding. So when you get to that point of having a spirit that's like, I just don't know how to convey this to you, and when they ask those questions, they get either angry answers because they've already been yelled at, or they will get non-answers or silence. Not because they aren't capable of giving an answer, it's more of the fact that they haven't had the mutual respect to get some answer out of them. And so that's where a lot of it is. So I think in terms of when, kind of bringing it back to death work, when we are understanding how this works and understanding, the new and shiny things, especially for the new mediums who are, out there, they're like, tell me everything about the afterlife. What's it like? You may not get the answers you're looking for, and you may not get an answer at all. And it's not mostly probably because of the fact that you're asking for somebody to explain quantum physics to somebody who's never even taken a science course.
Absolutely. It's so important in any of these practices to focus on the actual process and that hands-on practical side of things. Because if you get swept up into trying to understand the theology of it or the metaphysics of it, it gets in the way of living the process that you're supposed to be living. You don't have to understand radio waves or how radio works in order to use a radio. And in the same way, we're working with things that we don't have to understand the ultimate how does it work. We
Mm-hmm.
just have to know that we're being, ultimately, what do we know? We know we're being guided by spirits. We know that we are getting information and guidance from them on how to help others. And so we know that also that if we follow these steps, that we cause healing in our ancestral line. We help spirits move over to the other side. We can do all these things. We don't have to understand exactly how it's working. The core thing is to find yourself in the practical side and in that embodied experience of these things, and actually trust your own experience of this, because that's all that we can really know at this time. Ultimately, we are just a certain type of animal dwelling on one planet in this gigantic cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most dangerous things you can do is to try and channel, let's say, the consciousness of the galaxy. I 100% like it's very bad to do it. Nobody do it. Do not try it, because it can really shift and destroy your fragile psyche here. I mean, ultimately, we're like little cells within a body, and so, of course, if you come at it from an animist point of view, the sun is conscious. The galaxy itself is conscious. It's kind of this super body that's constructed of all these smaller cells. Well, there's no way that you're going to understand the process of healing that the galaxy is undergoing. Um, but at the same time, okay, you can understand that might be going on, but you do not have access to that, right? We very much still have this Western society has this idea. I think it comes from early on in Christianity, where Noah gets off the boat and God says, all this world and all the animals and everything, it's under your domain now. I think that very much led to this idea within Western culture that humans are the epitome of creation. We're at the top, right? This goes back to the Adam and Eve story. We were made in God's image. And so therefore, as these little microcosms of God, we can have knowledge of everything. Everything was constructed for us, and therefore all the physical rules and principles are accessible to our minds. And I think it's very important to move away from that and realize, look, we are literally a form of primates embodied by spirits. Our spirits can do what it can with this vessel, but at the same time, there's other spirit that's embodying the entire galaxy. What do you think its thoughts are? They would be completely incomprehensible to our primate minds. So really do not beat yourself up, people, about not understanding exactly how these processes of healing and living are working.
Mhm.
Just get into that embodied sense. Just realize there's no way I can know exactly how this is working, because I find that's the other thing, is that you can really get caught up in trying to understand existence and going from one philosophy to the next and one metaphysics to the next, and trying to figure out in a rational way which one is true for you. I, I'd say, look, any metaphysics should be something that enables your practice. So you're never going to get something that is complete, that is completely thorough and answers all the questions. You just need something that works for you to give you a framework for your actions in life and for the healing that you're bringing others. And that's really the most you can get in this life. And so always focus on the practical side of living, because you can get completely lost asking the big questions when it really comes down to, why are you here, right? Why are we even incarnated? And that is to live this life as a human and to play out certain patterns of being, and also to heal trauma and to heal and to move on to the other side. That's our cycle. That's It's just like looking at some single-celled organism in a pond. It lives, it dies, it plays its role within that ecosystem. In the same way, us humans are doing the same thing. And of course, we definitely have the spiritual component about it, where we heal after we die, and we heal while we die as well. I guess that comes from the more complex consciousness that's in us because of our very complex brain. It can act as this container, this whirlpool of consciousness, as it's been described, that can bring about higher states. But ultimately, we are not it. We're not the epitome of creation, if you will. And so the best we can do is work within those confines. And if you do that, you can really find your path. You can really find your path through this life that will play out your highest pattern and find the goals, let's say, of your higher self in this life, if you just focus on what little old me can do in this life. And so when you find a practice of healing, you know what? You were more than likely called to it. It's more than likely part of your path, part of your pattern. Open yourself to it, get involved with it, and it will lead you to a fulfilling life. And I think that is the most that anyone can ask of in this life. And so you've really found then your place in the great scheme of things, in the great ecosystem of this universe, when you just focus on just being content
Mhm.
playing that part.
And I think in terms of, kind of bringing it full circle before we wrap up the last bit of our show, is if you are being called to death work, death work is more than just helping spirits on the other side. It's also healing work for yourself. Understanding a large part of your own shadow and working with that. If you're not sure about shadow work, there is an episode either before this one or just before, like one or two episodes before this one, that discusses shadow work that I had a wonderful chat with Storm Fairy Wolf about. So you can learn all about shadow work and why it's important, how to work on it, and those kinds of things. But there is a big part of working with your own shadow that is also important in death work and healing work. And I think kind of the last little bit that we were saying here towards the end is there's so much that it's all intertwined with each other. So, learning your healing modalities, whereas, learning how to communicate with the dead and understanding consciousness and all of these different things, each and every one of those is interlinked with each other in some way, shape, or form, and will be vitally important to what you do going forward. So whether you're a new medium, figuring out your path, deciding if this is what you want to do, if you want to work with the dead, or if you want to be a medium in other aspects, in other ways where you maybe only work with deity, whatever form that comes into you, as understanding the different aspects of the higher practices that we've discussed today here, which can be a little daunting, and I apologize if we overwhelmed anyone, but understanding all of those different aspects, even just in the smallest minute ways, understanding how healing can be important, life before death and after, understanding how death work is an important part of paganism that sometimes is a little bit overlooked or ignored. And then also understanding that working with yourself and those before they pass is also healing, and also healing your ancestors in that way is beneficial for you and future lines. So that's something that I would like everyone to kind of understand. Again, we wrapped a whole lot of topics into this. I want to say like an hour and a half. I don't know exactly how long we ran because I will have to make sure all the editing's done. But I know that we talked for a good bit, and we did break down a lot of topics. So if you are listening to this and you do have, some wonderful thoughts on it, please comment either on the YouTube video. I think you can also comment on Spotify or the podcast hub one, whichever one. But if you can, comment and let us know if any of these topics need expansion that you would like to know more about. And I'm happy to kind of go into deeper modes with that, and possibly with Eric and Laova or maybe other voices. But either way, if there's something here that we've discussed today that needs a bigger topic that isn't readily discussed or available, let us know, because sometimes we don't realize exactly how much something is missing until someone else points it out, kind of like the shadow work episode. That was something I didn't think needed to be talked about. Apparently it did. So that's why there's an episode on it. But this has been such an in-depth and an amazing conversation, and so much has been divulged, and we have broken down so many different topics within this avenue. And Eric and the brief bit that Laova was here, thank you both so much for being here. This was amazing. I always love having you guys on the show. It's so much fun, and we have some of the best conversations.
Oh, thanks so much for having us. It's been an absolute pleasure being on to discuss this. It's something that Laova and I are very passionate about. And one thought I would just want the audience to know before we head off is it can be very simple to dip your toe in the waters of psychopomp and deathwork. Just say a prayer. Just, if you want, just before you go to bed each night, just send out a prayer to those who have passed on or to your ancestors, and it just helps that healing process take part. In fact, we have a little prayer ritual that we have posted on our website that has helped many people when they're uh, helping someone in their family pass on. It's just a little prayer to read every night for like 9 nights, and it just gives guidance and also calls the guides to help that person pass over. So it can be very simple what you're doing. So that is that's what I would say. So yeah, absolutely, it was amazing to be on the show to talk about these topics. It's an important subject.
Now, because we've had you on the show so many times, and I'm sure our listeners hopefully all know where to find you, your website is the spiritworldcenter.com, right?
That's correct. Yeah. And we're
Yes.
also on Instagram at spirit_world_center. And those are the two main places to find us, Instagram and our website.
See, I keep trying to get them to go on TikTok, y'all, but they haven't gotten there yet. So one day.
One of these days. One of these days.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening to us. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you guys had a great time listening to us talk about all these really awesome topics. And make sure you're staying safe, be kind to each other, and we will see you all next time. Bye, everyone.